Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Beau Taillefer and Eric Rasmussen. Season 2, Episode 39, Eric's in a New Band. All right, Beau, I started playing a new band.
Yeah, that's what you were... Tell us about it. That's what you were saying.
We're doing some funk, we're doing some R&B, a little bit of jazz. These guys, none of them use music, and they just send you, 20 tunes on a YouTube playlist, and it's like, okay, we're going to see you on Friday.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, so it's time for me to audiate in the wild. So what do I do, right? I try to play them by ears without anything, just right. Figure out what the trumpet part is. Sometimes the trumpet part, there is no trumpet part, so it's like just learn the changes, learn the melody. But sometimes there is a trumpet part, but I can't hear it. I can't pick it out of the mess. That's a different kind of problem.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So you hunt for it online is in that case, right? So I can, learn it from something because I don't know what I'm even trying to tackle. But man, are my ears going through a loop-de-loop.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of music to get inside your mind and under your fingers.
And then I'm new to the band. The band's been together. It's like here I am, showing up at the door with my music stand and some of the charts that I found, like so I can fit in initially, like not make a fool of myself initially. And they were cool. They were really cool and generous, and everybody's working on something. So they say, don't worry about it. We're all working on something. They don't want to hear excuses.
Yep.
So you're just kind of, in the frying pan right away. And, I think one of my problems is not necessarily audiationally, but it's tied in because I think your audiation is tied in with your confidence. Like there's a level of confidence that I miss or don't have.
Yeah, this I
so there's a bunch of worms in
here.
this can.
Just a quick comment on the confidence. I mean, I remember Hal Galper talking about this, and I've experienced this too, where tunes really well, like the changes well, how to get from one section to the other. You have little substitutions you like, little licks you like to play, little things that come up. You get so comfortable doing that, you're able to play with a higher degree of confidence, and for me, this leads to actually taking more playful risks in my improv and stuff like that. And that's hard. It's hard to emulate that when you're actually not comfortable with the tune. It's you really can't do it. You can't have the brain just shut off and just let your intuition take the solo, because those are where the real good solos happen, when you're not even there making choices about like this chord or that chord or this lick. It's just things just get shipped out and they either work or don't work. But it's hard to do that when you're not comfortable over a tune. Whatever your metric is for comfortable. I mean, maybe it's harmonic, maybe it's rhythmic, maybe you just don't get the form of the song. There's all these other things that have to come together,
Yeah. For me, it's like I can definitely audiate better when I'm home than when I'm in the band room, in the basement, right? The man cave.
There's a filter that I've found when I'm playing with a group or playing on stage. So much of what I can play gets stripped away, in a sense. Where at home I'll have all these licks and all these ideas, but on the stage it's like only the stuff that's really solid comes out. Only the stuff that you really have authority over comes out in your playing. That's my experience.
So here, these guys don't use a lick of paper. they listen to the tune, and then I don't know how the keyboard player does this, but he just sits down and plays the dang thing, and sometimes has to work out a chord, or he puts in what he thinks it is, and it sounds just as good as what it probably really is, and I can't tell the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the tunes sound better when the band's playing them than what I'm listening to at home with my headphones on and my trumpet in my face.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. Like, oh, I didn't care for this tune at all. And then all of a sudden in rehearsal, we're playing it and I'm going, this is kind of okay. You know, it's kind of jazz changes, you know, some kind of pop, you know, new R&B tune. I don't even like the term how R&B is gotten applied to the new pop, you know, like R&B to me is Detroit, and this stuff is not
Mm-hmm.
Detroit at all,
Mm-hmm.
not in the least, really.
I am
Um,
familiar with what you're describing, though, in the sense where whether it's like a piano piece or a guitar piece or whatever the piece is, I've listened to pieces and been like, and then I learn them and I'm like, whoa, like there's,
yeah,
and I think the same thing can happen even if you don't learn them yourself. You're just like listening to a live band play them. You can get captivated by the sound in a different way, which is very interesting.
yeah. The sax player in this band, I play trumpet, if you don't already know, out there. The sax player, he he's a jazzer, and he just picks up stuff so quick. The whole band does really. Um, and I feel like it's a good feeling for me to like have the, you know, what's the word? I just have the freedom to just be wherever I am and don't worry about it. You'll catch up, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I feel like I'm totally in the fire, and
Yeah,
it's
and
like
when you have a
where
lot of repertoire to learn, I mean,
and
it's
these guys, yeah, and they're learning new stuff too, but they just kind of like, I don't know where I'm going. Here's where I want to go with this conversation, actually, now that I want to think about it, is that these guys didn't, you know, they're not in any music learning theory classes,
yes,
right?
yeah.
Where did they come from? Why are they doing what they're doing? How did they go about getting where they are like that? I asked the keyboard player because he's the one that most awe inspiring to me, like how he knows what changes are being played
Mm-hmm.
and what it. But like, where did you learn this? He says, you know, YouTube University.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
So YouTube University. That's what this guy's doing.
well, and we were talking about this, Eric, a while ago. You know, jazz is jazz or these kind of communities that pop up. I'm not talking about like bebop or swing specifically. I'm talking about even funk. I would classify as this. It's a way of approaching learning music, and the way the bands are. And a lot of it's done by ear, but that doesn't necessarily um, detract from sometimes these bands even do use notation. I'm not saying that by any means, but you know, Eric and I were having a chat a while ago, and I came up on this stuff from the wild side, in a sense. I did not learn. I don't credit music learning theory with my audiation skills. I think it has sharpened my ability to learn new content now, but I did not um, become a musician that could audiate tonalities and do the stuff I can do from music learning theory in the sense of I didn't have a Gordon esque teacher teaching me tonal patterns, but the things I was doing were were very much were very much explainable by music learning theory. But I came up from that other side, from the traditions where people kind of forced you to learn things by ear and be able to play things on the spot, and just kind of pushed you into a circumstance where you either had to find the most efficient way to audiate, or you just wouldn't be able to play the gig. Essentially, you know, you couldn't play the tune. And so by process of elimination, um, I just figured out, and some coaching too, I figured out what worked and what didn't.
Yeah.
you know?
So the thing I hear is like you didn't have capital MLT, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And but you were engaged in lowercase MLT in that you were using your ears like that.
Like
Now,
crazy.
were you going in the back door too, like getting the what we wanted to do an episode on going in the back door, like learning through theory, getting names of notes, getting playing stuff until it got into your ear too. Is
Yeah, I
that
did that a
going on?
lot. I did that a lot in the sense that people would more often describe, like when I started learning the tonalities when I was younger. I actually credit video games and film music for this more so than just listening to records, because there's so much going on in terms of different tonalities and meters being played in film music and in video game music. But once I started learning how to play them on my instrument, beyond just the listening exposure that I had, a lot of it was coming from the back door. People would be like, okay, there's all these tonalities, and I
Yeah,
would make a list of them, and then I would try to, on purpose, learn things by ear that supported. So the theory was not so much like a memorizing of intellectual thing. It was more of like a map of what was out there to be learned, in a sense, right?
yeah,
And so, in a sense, though, it's coming through the back door, because I was like, okay, I know there's this thing called Phrygian, and it reminds me of these
yeah.
songs, but how do I actually play this on my instrument? And, what are the most efficient ways to do all that? And, I consider myself lucky in the sense that when I was younger, my actual guitar teacher was not pushing learning tonalities. I was just really involved with like Steve Vai and Joe
Yeah.
Satriani, and they were big proponents of learning tonalities. And looking back, that was probably like the best thing that could have happened to the like 12 year
Steve
old
Vai
version
is
of
a
me.
killer. Who's the other
Steve Vai is
guy?
an absolute monster. Steve Vai
He's
was
he's he's stupid. He was in Zappa's band.
yeah, he was at Berkeley, and then he was sending Zappa transcriptions of Zappa's like percussion music, and like good luck doing that. And so Zappa was like, who is this guy? And Zappa hired him. The official position was not lead guitar, it was stunt guitar. So Zappa played
Yes,
guitar, and there's other guitar
yes.
players in the band, but Vai's music is very interesting in the sense that
Oh,
it's there's so much exploration of amazing content,
yeah.
meters,
He's he's
forms,
he's sick. He's just
tonalities, things, tonalities that we don't even have names for in MLT.
he's just sick. That's all I got to say. He's a sick guy.
But anyways, what I'm
But who's
getting
the
at,
other? No,
oh,
who's the other guy you said?
Joe Satriani.
Okay.
Yeah, he's so Satriani is an amazing guitarist, and the difference for me, Satriani and Vai, like Vai, I get much more of the Frank Zappa vibe from. Like he's a guitar player.
Hmm.
Vai sounds like Eddie Van Halen mixed with Frank Zappa. That's what I would describe
Hmm.
that as. Satriani is very virtuosic in terms of electric guitar, but it's got a more core rock vibe to it.
Okay.
The forms are more rock
Yeah.
based, and Vi has that too, but it's I would say it's much more influenced by other things. So they're different. But Vi actually took some guitar lessons with Satriani when he was beginning.
Yeah.
But Satriani's music is very modal, or different tonalities, if you want to use
Yeah.
whatever term you want to use. But
The
anyways, when I
tunes.
was growing up with
Yeah.
this stuff, I was a good enough audiator to realize when other people were audiating and when they weren't. And that was like a compass that I had. I could tell when people were kind of doing this like decoding, like fake playing thing. And I really was not interested in getting advice from people. I was like 12 or 13. I had a lot of listening exposure before that, but I was 12 or 13 when I was playing guitar. That was like my main instrumental thrust. And I just would weed people out. Like my aunt could audiate extremely well. Everything's by ear. She's always struggled with notation. And I could tell, like, damn, when she plays something, like it comes down like a hammer. And same with my brother. He was a piano player. And so I had a bit of a compass to tell like when someone was musical or not. And I would follow
Yeah.
that. And what I eventually found was that people that could sing things at the same time that they play them, or sing them from memory, were better than people who couldn't. And that was always my litmus test. And I found that kind of wisdom or advice echoed in the jazz community at large. And so I didn't actually find this with the classical community unless they were composers typically. So the classical composers I grew up trusting, like classical musicians that could improvise and
Hmm.
compose, I was like, oh yeah, they know what they're
Yeah.
doing. But people that were just reading sheet music and interpreting, I often didn't get the sense that they were audiating the music very well. Not to say that all performers are like that by any means. Professional
Yeah.
performers, professional soloists clearly can often audiate, but my internal compass made me trust improvisers and composers more before I was infected with any of this Gordon or MLT stuff, because it just the other advice just didn't seem to work in practical application. Learning
Yeah.
something through memory always seemed to provide some benefit that you and by memory I mean singing the thing from memory with the correct meter and tonal context behind it. I mean that's very MLT way of putting it, but jazz musicians don't talk like that. Like when you talk to people in bands, like that's a philosophical mouthful. People are like, can you play the thing from memory? Can you sing it? Or can you whistle it? If you can't, like, it's kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Totally.
these jazz groups, in the wild, they have this because you're in the pressure cooker in the sense where there's like, here's 20 tunes, learn them by the time you come back. Um,
Oh, I've been in this
basically,
band
you
for
have to figure
about
out what
a
works and
week and
does
a
what doesn't
half.
work. Yeah,
I
exactly.
have a week and a half.
Yeah.
And I mean, and what I had, so you grew up trying to learn to audiate, right? Based on your selection of these people that could do it. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
I grew up, names of note, lines and spaces on piano. Then I went to trumpet and it was just so much easier. It was just easy, right? But everything was read. I don't know the first time I even tried to take a solo in high school, and I
Hmm.
had no clue what I'm doing. So I had to write something out to so that I could play something for the concert because every time I took a solo, I just felt terrible about it. I just didn't
Totally.
know.
Totally.
So
And
I,
this is where my experience kind of lines up more with what Gordon probably would recommend. I had so much listening exposure that by the time I picked up an instrument, I could already improvise. There was
yeah,
no like period of being with the instrument where I could not improvise. It was immediately as soon as I
yeah,
was around a piano, I could hear sounds and find them on my own. And so
yeah,
it's very difficult for me as a teacher to put, as you've commented on before, to put myself in the position of my students who are wielding an instrument but don't have that fundamental listening vocabulary
yeah.
and ability already.
Well, I grew up with, Spike Jones and all kinds of symphony music. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and then whatever was on TV, I suppose, too. Um, I did have a really solid, listening. I mean, I didn't listen to any pop much at all. I mean, that Spike Jones is the fun music that I listened to, but
Mm-hmm.
everything else, I mean, it was fun too. It was, Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms, Verdi, whatever my dad had on the stereo, I just wanted to be like that, like this, listen to the good stuff because this is good stuff. And then only later did my ears get opened up, in high school a little bit, but more so in college, to a lot of great pop and a lot of great jazz. Um, but we didn't listen to that in the house. My brothers listened to the radio, and I didn't like the music. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I had this other listening vocabulary, which did well for me to, apply style to the marching band tunes we played, to the concert band tunes we played, to you know, uh, to the pit orchestra, the regular orchestra, and I was always like among the top musicians, no matter what age. Um, but it's just the deciphering the code, and I know I could audiate some or whatever, but now it's like that's because I grew up learning that way, that when I have a new challenge like this 20 tunes in this band in a week and a half, is I I try to sit down and I spend a half hour on a tune and try to just do as much as I can by ear, but I'm not good enough to know that what I'm practicing is correct,
Mm-hmm.
or that how I'm practicing is a good way to practice. Despite listening, I re-listened to the Molly episode, Molly Gibrian, too.
Oh, I mean, what you
So
just said, I
this,
think is so important. It's really important because, let's say, for example, we're going to make the claim that learning songs by ear is just generally a good idea and perhaps better than, but I'm not throwing sheet music under the bus. I'm just saying, like, even if you're using it, it's still useful to learn to commit things to memory, melodies, all that stuff. But the problem is even if you know that, there's so many other things about learning in general that aren't even music specific that have such a big impact on how well you'll retain what you're doing and how well your methods of, like, for a practical example, like when you're learning a new tune, and let's say you're going to spend half an hour with this new tune. I mean, there's already a bunch of assumptions baked into that as a method being a good idea. Spending a half an hour with one tune, right? And so I'm not necessarily saying that that's bad, but there's so much juice in learning about how the human mind organizes new information and retains new information and new skills that if you don't know about, you're at a disadvantage, like, for sure. Because kind of the method, the tried and true method that all these great jazz musicians have used across time is just play for 12 hours a day and everything will work out fine. But that's not usually a strategy that most students and, even teachers can employ. We need methods of learning that don't require people to be working for 14 hours a day. Because I would even claim, even if you are working for 14 hours a day, how you use that time is gonna make or break, what you get out of it. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of other things, but like some basic stuff in the sense of, one of the reasons I like students having the song to listen to and why I'm such a big fan of what this band did with you. It's like, here are the songs, like, not the here's the sheet music, here are the literal songs you can listen to. Because this is surprisingly uncommon. Eric and I were talking about this recently. High school bands and even, junior bands or whatever it is, middle school, like, so many of the band teachers don't give the students the songs to listen to. And like, how many times in a high school band, if you're a band director, have you noticed that, like, your tuba player can't recognize the flute melody that's the main theme of the piece? I mean, that's concerning to me, right? Or even their own part. And so in my experience with being in bands like what Eric's talking about, the more modern method, when I encounter people that audio well, they just give you the pieces in terms of like a YouTube video or an iTunes thing. And again, I want to put a big caveat around everything I'm saying. I'm not saying that if you're in Pat Metheny's band and he gives you sheet music, you should get on his case. Sheet music is not the problem. The problem is people not learning to audio. And typically sheet music creates issues when people depend on it for what it's not meant to be depended on. But in my experience, great audiators, they just typically just say, here are the pieces, just listen to them. And why is that important? You need to establish context, right? And so so many beginning students, they open up a piece of sheet music and they don't even just like they don't even just establish context before they play. They don't know that they should be doing that. But if you listen to the piece before you play it, it typically will do that for you.
So the thing that I can master right away is the style, right? It's like I can bring my trumpet and get the style, or even polish the style more with some backup licks or things that I'm invited to create. Like the saxophone player says, when I'm in this B section, he said it'd be great if you used your harmon mute and just diddle around, while I'm playing this part. I think that'll add something great. Go, and so I can do that, right? That's because I'm generating it. I'm audiating in a mode of generating what I'm supposed to audiate. And that's easier than for me to learn the melody right away. Some of the melodies are really kind of vague tonally, and sometimes, but it's all major and minor chords. There's very rare is there something different.
Yeah, and there's another good point in here. What you're talking about is having a short list of what matters more than other stuff. I mean, style's insanely important, and I often in my own personal experience, even though I'm I'm obsessed with harmony in terms of chord progressions, tonality, all that. I'm
Yep.
like literally. This is the reason I have contacted Eric, is because I was just hunting for people that were talking about this stuff. But my own experience is when people are learning songs, they do not pay enough attention to rhythm and melodic form before harmony. So like it's great if you understand the complexities of the chord changes you're playing and you can audiate all that. But if you can't even audiate the rhythm of the melody and the rhythm pattern that is the melody itself, I mean, the harmony is not going to save you. And so there, in my mind, there is a hierarchy. The rhythmic and melodic motifs supersede the harmony in terms of what's worth spending time on, because even if you understand the harmonic context and the tonal context, if you don't have the rhythm of the melody down and the form of the melody and all that stuff, the form of the song, it's just not worth understanding first in comparison. And my own experience with dealing with jazz musicians is that once you open Pandora's box of chord progressions, you can essentially get sidetracked and forget about the simple basics of just learning a tune is often just having the rhythm down first. And people, you can see this with novice musicians soloing. Their rhythmic statements are often so horrible that their solos don't make sense. Like when you approach everything from this harmonic lens only without thinking of rhythm, the solos just turn into like weird, like it doesn't make sense. It's not music, in a sense. And there's a trap in harmony in there. And so I often find that, before you worry about like, is this tone or is this that tone? Like, do you even have that da 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 ba da ba ba ba? Do you have that down? Because if that's not there, some weird stuff. And we go back to that Dizzy Gillespie quote that I love. Some people think of a note and put a rhythm to it, but I think of a rhythm and put a note to it. And if you understand what's being pointed at there, a lot of your problems in terms of learning tunes and improvising just evaporate.
Yeah, because I land on what I think is going to be a chord tone, but I'm wrong. But then once you're there, you're just playing an upper neighbor or a lower neighbor to something you're going to move to, and the rhythm is more, is just more important than what notes you're playing.
It's
Initially.
profoundly more important. It's wild how much more important it is. And I would go listen to Mozart. The genius of Mozart is not in necessarily his use of harmony, even though that is arguably extremely beautiful. But the guy's sense of a phrase was so insane. Like I have not come across. I don't think anyone is quite the same as him. Or another example, if you think of the difference between Stravinsky and Schoenberg, and I'm painting broad strokes here, and I obviously think Schoenberg's an amazing musician. I'm not throwing Schoenberg under the bus, so I better not get an email about this. But the reason I like Stravinsky more than Schoenberg is I feel his sense of melody had a stronger direction in terms of melody and rhythm. They both use amazing, beautiful harmony, challenged the boundaries of harmony. But Stravinsky, in my mind, it's more melodic in the sense that the ideas have a real melodic thrust to them, and it makes it more listenable.
Yeah, well, he is in my book. I don't know anybody who would fight otherwise, but I would like to hear that, hear that fight. Are you audiating? Are you thinking theoretically about what Schoenberg did? But just straight up musically, yeah, Mozart and Stravinsky, they're at the top of my.
But this is a great piece of practical advice when you are learning. If you're in a group where they're playing tunes that are over your head, and you've got to learn 22 tunes, and you got to sort out what's going on in these tunes. My general strategy myself is don't get bogged down by one tune's like really crazy chord change that you can't audiate yet. Make sure you can audiate the form of the tunes first and the general rhythmic thrust of the ideas. And that's just such a good skeleton to put everything else inside. Because in one sense, no one cares what you play over a chord change unless it sounds good. No one cares if you like hit all the chord tones. Those are extracted as principles to help you play things that sound good. But when you try to reverse engineer it and say like, okay, all right, boys, I'm going to really nail this solo. I'm going to outline all the chord changes. No one gives a crap about that. They don't care. They don't care. It may actually work, but and learning to do that is invaluable. If you can't use tonal patterns, or, you know, no one in the jazz community is going to say that. They're going to say, can you play chord tones over the changes? That's what's actually going to be said in a group of jazz musicians. And so you need to translate a little bit. If you're used to the MLT terminology, I recommend, you know, knowing the actual street terminology. People are just going to say, can you play over the changes? Can you play the chord tones of the changes? And you got to know that someone who says that isn't necessarily ignorant of music learning principles. And I think there's a tendency, or there's a possibility, to think that they might not know what they're talking about. But in my experience, the ones that audiate, they're using those terms maybe not as precisely as we want to in MLT, but they know what they're talking about.
Yeah. Is it the case that I'm like just being thrown into generalization? Kind of like,
Yeah, potential. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
you know,
that's basically what's happening.
it's like you're, you know, and you don't have enough, you know, what am I missing
Well, you
when,
don't have enough You don't have enough knowledge at the discrimination level. You don't have enough content at the discrimination level to generalize over these new changes or new whatever, new forms,
but
and that's what I think is holding.
yeah, but am I, you know, I'm being forced into generalization, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
initially, and eventually, I learn the melody and I learn the form. I
Hmm.
may not be good at the changes yet, but I got, you
Sure.
know, the style is down. I don't have the changes like, but I don't know that I don't. I can play over the stuff. I
Hmm.
just don't know what I'm playing over necessarily. But I hear where I'm going. I hear where the changes are going. So I'm, you know,
Yeah, there's
that's
something online.
generalization or oral that's happening.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, and then I guess after a few times through the tune, it starts to solidify, and Lord knows, you know, in two or 2 or 5 or 10 months, you know, I'll be hopefully masterful on these 20, and we'll have another 20 more. They want me to give the band five, they want me to give five more tunes to the band. I'm like, I don't need to
Perfect.
give myself any more work right now.
Yeah.
But
So
everybody
something you,
contributes, like it's a democracy too. We should talk about
that's
this.
cool.
It's a Nobody's like the leader that says, you know, people act like the leader here and there all the time, but I mean, nobody's saying, all right, these are the, this is the, you know, this is the, how the rehearsal's going to go. And no, everybody just
Sure.
works among themselves. It's different than any band I played with because I've always played with a band that there's somebody or one or two people that are the, you know, the king.
Yeah, and those are very different. I've had experiences in both those kinds of bands, and I think they both can be healthy. It's just more of it's more of knowing like what kind of group are you in. You know, if someone's paying you to play a gig and they're a band leader, I mean, I would generally just go along with what they're doing musically, not ethically. You know, you can fight back on ethical things you don't like, but
Yeah.
musically, I mean, if it's their group, it's their group. But um, if Stravinsky's conducting the orchestra you're in, and he says you're phrasing it wrong, you're phrasing it wrong. But when you're in a democratic group, I mean that all of what I just said goes out the window. You know, someone might act like the leader for one tune, or you might pass the baton, which is a cool thing that happens. Or there might be collaborative kind of like I find that a lot with composing situations I find myself in with other songwriters, where like one person kind of is like the A section is like this, and then the other person in the group might be like contributing the B section, and they have more of a say about how. So there's different ways you can pass off, um, sign off rights on
Yeah.
section. That's cool.
So if music that I'm learning uh, gets I really want to formulate it. So what I'm wrestling with in my head is putting everything I'm learning inside you know, the the small MLT bubble because it MLT is always at work. It just always is at work, or the lack of it.
Sure.
You're
Yeah. Yeah.
either fighting upstream or flowing downstream with it.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, that's the assumption is that I'm not audiating something yet, right? Uh, and so and doing tonal patterns and rhythm patterns isn't gonna get me, or is it?
Well, not it. There's a lot in there, right? Because it may help, right? But the problem is when when you go back to this whole part whole model, and I'm not even making this claim based off of what I've heard for whole part whole from the Gordwinian MLT crowd. This is just a fact of learning in general. When you decontextualize learning or make drills that are so decontextualized, they can't be transferred back into the initial context. So whole part whole is a way of saying what I just said.
Yeah,
But let's say you have a set of changes, like Eric's criteria for audiating this tune. He's got the melody, but he's not audiating something in the tune, let's say harmonically. The question is like making a tonal pattern out of that change potentially going to help him audiate it? Probably. But if it's not put back into context of the original chord progression and improvised and generalized and all that within that, the tonal pattern might not help as much as you think it will. And so you have to think of context, right? And so I think that learning chord patterns, we talked about this on an episode, I don't remember which one, my apologies, but learning chord patterns is essential for learning to audiate correctly, because if the tonal patterns are so decontextualized from the harmonic and rhythmic form that they're actually in tunes, you won't be able to improvise over them as well as you think you would by learning to sing and memorize tonal patterns. And I've been singing that song, for a while on this podcast, but I found it's true. Because I do think it's possible to be able to sing. Let's say you want to learn how to sing augmented 5 chords, right? So you keep going 1 and then a 5 chord that's augmented back and forth. That's great. That's going to boost your tonal audiation of those patterns. But if you don't learn to do those patterns in specific, like longer chord progressions, that ability won't generalize to an actual song structure as well as you think it would. So I'm a big fan of tonal patterns. I'll go on the record as that. But there are these issues where it's like, well, I'm doing the tonal patterns, but it's not doing what I think it should do, right? And this is where Eric's work with hearing harmonic gestalts, aka hearing chords, actually does something different than just hearing tonal patterns does. I'm convinced of that.
yeah. Yeah, but the first thing I'm doing when they start playing a tune that's not even in my list, they say let's run this, and like, okay, all I'm after is like the resting tone and where the resting tone changes. That's it.
Yeah, I mean that should be that's step one, right?
That it just and then from that I can noodle over the tune. So they let me take a solo on stuff, and they said, you didn't play that tune before, did you? I'm like, no. And I said,
yeah.
how did you? They were asking me, like, I never learned that tune.
Sure.
They knew I hadn't learned that tune, but it was a familiar enough, context and the changes. I said tunes like that, all the changes are the same anyway.
Yeah.
And I didn't know the tune. I didn't know the changes necessarily, but I could totally improvise over it, faking it more or less. But faking it was not fake, though, right?
Yeah, faking it was not fake because you already had enough mastery over the content in terms of whatever harmony, tonality to just kind of fly with it.
But then I'm generating the audiation again. That's the point. I'm not like being held to a particular melody, a black and white, this is the way the melody goes, and I don't, and I don't want to fudge. You don't want to fudge the melody.
Sure.
That's no good. I mean, initially you do. That's on my way. That's an imitative behavior
that's an interesting spot to be in, where harmonically the tune is obvious to you. There's nothing that surprises you, but you still don't have the melody committed to memory. I mean, you still have to go through that process. You might be able to like pick it up pretty quickly, but someone else could be in the opposite situation. I've had students know the melody better than I do of the song they're learning, but they don't understand the harmony of the song, so they couldn't really improvise over it. So
Yeah.
they're separate things for sure. Yeah, quite different from each other. But what ends up happening though is, and as you become more skilled and you have a repertoire of pieces you can navigate in terms, you know, the changes of the tunes, you're very comfortable harmonically going from one chord to another, and you can do that without a lot of theoretical fluff. It's just you know how to audiate it essentially. What happens is when you learn new tunes, you get this feeling like, I'm kind of making my way over this new tune and everything seems well, but it doesn't feel as secure as this other tune that I know, as Autumn Leaves or whatever, you know. And so you start making these comparisons between, like, you don't know that tune as well as other tunes you know. And so there's proof there in your own experience of being able to improvise and audiate that there's something deeper at play. And so this is what I mean about there's levels of knowing a tune. It's one thing to be able to like make it through the tune. It's another thing to, you know, the tune so well, you know, like 5 different substitutions you can put over every chord. That's a different level of mastery. And I think this is why so many great jazz musicians re-record the same tunes every 10 or 20 years, is because their understanding of the tunes grows, you know. They might get into some new harmonic thing, new type of substitution, and then they go back and start applying that to old tunes that they knew, and it just kind of, it starts changing everything. It feeds back on itself.
Yeah. Well, this is I've played in this style before. I've played in bands like this before, except not ones that are democratic like this one. But, and I've got my chops from, early jazz chops, and I've got it's stuff that tunes that I know well. This is just a different experience for me now, and I thought it was really good to explore like what's going on in my mind, and also talk through my conundrum. Like, what's going on is because it's an interesting thing, like learning. I'm the student, and the teacher is the YouTube video that I'm, and that's it. And then when I can find the chart and save my time, like I can read the melody, and then that, using that gets me to the end job quicker.
So that's when I think it's valid to use notation, is when it actually gets you to the end job of being able to audiate something faster. And a great example of this I can give is when I was younger, I had photocopied part of the Rite of Spring, and I was studying like certain sections of this. And part of the Rite of Spring is the meter in the beginning specifically. It can be interpreted in so many different ways because you don't know where the macro beats are, essentially, right? And so what I found, and I didn't have an MLT vocabulary at this time to describe, but I found when I conducted along with the score, I was conducting the macro beats based on what I was seeing in the notation. It was making me audiate the correct thing, or better put, it was making me audiate what Stravinsky wanted me to audiate. And so I would say that is a totally valid use of theory. It's helping me audiate better. Any tool that's helping you audiate better is a good use of your time. But the distinction that the MLT community is making, and that I'm making, and Eric's making, and that Gordon made, is that when notation is used as something that blocks audiation, it's a liability. But it can also be used as something that supports and helps make audiation clearer.
Well, here's the thing. If I only used my ears, but I would need more time, I would come out the end of that a better musician than I am if I'm using the music. But for the sake of getting my part right in the band, I'm going to use the music so I can get there faster. But if I keep doing that, I'm not going to, if I only used my ear for 2-3 years in this band, I'll come out the other end a far better musician than I will if I keep using the crutch of the, and it's not a crutch.
But this is where the
depends on the purpose,
cost
right?
comes into case. Is let's make a few scenarios here. Let's say you have an hour a day to practice, and you only used your ear for the next 2 to 3 years on these pieces and all the pieces you're getting from this band. Boom. That's situation A. Situation B is you have half an hour to use notation, half an hour to use your ear. What would happen in that case? Situation C is you have an hour to use your ear, just like situation A, but you also have a half an hour to use notation at the same time. So what I want to know, and I think this is a perennial issue that comes up in these conversations about note names and theory and all this stuff, is the extra half an hour of theoretical decoding, whatever you want to call it, hindering the audiation? I think not. But it's a very complicated question to answer, because the situation B is an opportunity cost where we can say the half an hour of theoretical decoding is actually robbing time from doing things by ear. And so I think that's a valid claim. But is an extra half an hour that you wouldn't have done before on theory actually creating problems? I don't think it is, but I understand that different people feel differently about that.
Yeah, and there's to me, there's a context of this too, is that once you've already broken learning sequence, it's like you're polluted. It's like forever.
But this is my response to that is there's a difference between knowing you're decoding and not knowing you're decoding, right? So if you don't know you're decoding, but you literally are decoding, and you think that it's helping your audiation, and you don't actually do the things that grow your audiation, like sing the resting tone, sing then you're lost at sea. But if you know what you're doing is decoding and you're taking the back door, I think that that's a perfectly valid thing to do. And so part of what we're talking about here, Eric, is like there's MLT when you're a teacher applying it to your students. There's all these rules that have to be like followed, like rules, air quote, like lowercase r. But when you're your own student, you are the teacher and the student at the same time. You have a framework for how MLT works. I think in that case, you actually can take the back door if you know what you're doing. You can say, okay, theoretically this is a C major 7 sharp 5. I can't audiate this, and I'm going to do things that will help me audiate that. I don't think necessarily that's an issue.
No.
But the question is, when you first start, you need to know where you are in that sequence. You're at oral.
Yeah, totally.
Hopefully.
Well,
but
some of it is imitation right now. It's like some of it really is.
Or even that you're at the point where you have because the theoretical understanding that Gordon talked about at the end of the sequence is the cherry on top, right? But what happens is when people start using theoretical labels, they think they're at the cherry, but no, you're actually just at the first step. And some people don't make it there. Right? They have fancy labels for all these chords, but they're not audiating anything. So I don't think it's a problem if the theoretical labels are being used as like a way to track kind of, okay, I want to learn this. That's fine. But you gotta not fool yourself. It's like is this Richard Feynman? The quote? It's like, you're the easiest. I don't know what the quote is. It's like something like, you got to not fool yourself, and you're the easiest person to fool. Like,
yeah, it sounds like him.
Something like that. He's an interesting guy. But what's amazing is Feynman understood this distinction between labels giving you the illusion of understanding. Labels do fuck all when you don't understand what they're pointing to.
Yep.
And this is essentially like a philosophical insight that you can have that is transcendent of MLT. This applies to art, visual art. This applies to mathematics. Like, if you actually think of this in relation to mathematics, like what's the difference between having a sense of the number 3 and theoretically knowing the label number 3? It's profoundly different. They are radically different. And this exists in chess. This exists in theory of drawing. This distinction between true perceptual understanding, or aka audiation in a sense, and theoretical understanding. It's a really cool thing. I mean, even Lao Tzu, it's the first line of the Tao Te Ching. The Tao that can be named is not the true Tao. The label is not the thing itself. And that's one of my passions about MLT is like, I had heard about that distinction before, and I'd made that distinction with music. And then I found this guy who had really thought about it, done empirical research around this. But I think that's one thing the jazz community has fully recognized kind of in the wild, is this distinction between labels and the real understanding. And that's why I think those communities produce such insane audiators, is because they're not necessarily fooled. The people that I see being fooled by theory are more often like young 20-year-old jazz students at like universities. They're kind of hung up in the like the fancy chord names, and everything's about like sharp 11s and crazy shit like that, but no one can audiate like 1 and 4 chords. Which is, I mean, I'd love to hear your experience with that, because that's my experience when I have jazz students. They playing all this crazy stuff, but I'm like, okay, can we just improvise over like 1, 4, 5?
Well, it's not honoring. All for me is like if you can't honor the culture that it's coming from,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like if you want to understand Wayne Shorter, you better know the blues before you try to understand Wayne Shorter.
Mm-hmm.
And before Wayne Shorter, you want to go back and see where he came from. Beyond
Sure.
anything between the blues and where he is, but the blues is profoundly you know, uh, in his music.
The other thing I want to say about taking the back door is like, once you can already audiate to a decent level and you're teaching yourself, you can really use an instrument like the piano to take the back door. Like if I wanted to, I could play that theoretically on the piano and then sing that back to myself as a tonal pattern. And like I was saying before, you got to be very careful that you're not fooling yourself when you're. I will do stuff like that with a piano with me, where I'm playing my own tonal patterns theoretically, singing them back, and then later I'll just go for a walk and just sing everything I did from memory. And in my experience, that works just as well as like just doing tonal patterns without all that other stuff there. But I think Eric brings up a good point. Is like, once you've kind of broken the learning, like I'm aware of the theory now, I can't be unaware of it. But I also think you can get to a certain place where you can do that without breaking true MLT principles. You can use the theory in the beginning to guide what you're learning, but you got to be very careful when you do that to not fool yourself. I mean, you can also just do stuff like this. Just record a series of tonal patterns and put them on your phone, and then go for a walk later and sing them, and don't think about the names of the notes. Don't think about what it looks like on the piano. Just get everything away and just focus on the sound. And that's what I mean about like being careful. Because when you do this, are you really paying attention to the sound, or are you paying attention to the names of the notes, or what it looks like on the piano, or whatever? And that's kind of the
Yeah.
the potential liability in that. But I think a lot of great jazz musicians, when they do stuff like these great piano players, like you're talking about from this band that you're in, they have this distinction very clear. They're not getting confused about like, they may know the names and notes and know what it looks like on the keyboard, like a visual layout, but they're able to single out the audiation when they're learning it, and they're committing that to attention. But not everyone's doing that. Not everyone's doing that, So easy to kind of fool yourself. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Piano's
No.
a fun instrument for this too, because of the shapes of chords and the shapes of melodies. Because if you go, I'll teach students this, and then maybe they'll accidentally do this, hearing this as the resting tone. And you can tell when they're not auditing because they don't know the difference between those two. They don't hear this versus they're just doing the pattern, They're not. And so how do you confront their psyches with the fact that they're paying attention to the wrong thing? And that's where vision is a huge liability in terms of audiation, because vision can help you point at what you want someone to audiate, but when someone's using vision as like the basis for what to play, it gets out of hand real
Yeah.
fast.
So I'm just trying to my belly just knows that we got a rehearsal Tuesday night, right? Instead of Friday. So it's like I have 3 less days this week, and I just want to like.
I mean, that's why being in a band produces such good audiators, is because you have a deadline, right? And so now what are you going to do? You're going to do whatever it takes to get this stuff down. And so methods that don't work, I mean, hopefully they will be weeded out, and it produces this, type of motivation to practice that I find doesn't necessarily come without that same kind of deadline or pressure. Obviously, there's individuals who are just like sitting in their bedrooms, like learning amazing things on the piano or whatever. But I do think there is the great power in being in a group and having, 20 songs thrown at you.
Did we go for an hour?
Yeah.
This is going to be short for me, but no. That's great.
All right,
All
we'll
right.
leave you there. If you want to,
Yeah.
here's a pattern you can commit to memory. A beautiful chord.
It is. It is. What was that? Hunting what? What did you describe?
So, longtime listeners of the podcast will recall an episode where I was playing with this tonality, Lydian sharp 2. It's a beautiful sound. It's got some really cool harmony. I was showing it to one of my friends who's a really great musician, and the term he had for that tonality was beautiful haunting, or a haunting beauty. And I thought that was such a good term for Lydian sharp 2.
Hunting.
I'm still new to this, it'll probably, in terms of expectations, like how long will it take me to get this Lydian sharp 2 sound in my mind where it's as solid as the other content I know? Probably a while, probably from the time I first started exploring it, a year.
Yeah.
It's not just like I sing a few tonal patterns a couple times a week and then boom, it's flying out of my fingers. It's like it's already comfortable because I'm comparing it to Lydian. But it's got this little tweak. So the reason it's already online to a decent degree is it sounds like Lydian in my head,
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure.
But this love affair I've had with Lydian my whole life since I was like 12. I remember playing this Lydian thing. But I always had this problem, like Lydian. I was always unsatisfied with the harmony of Lydian. Like I felt like all I could do is. But this
Right.
Lydian sharp 2 thing, it's got other stuff in it.
Yeah.
It's got this other thing to it. So I don't know. I recommend exploring it if you haven't. So I haven't exposed too many of my students to it yet. A little bit here and there. Very informal though. They're coming in for their lesson, and I'm just noodling with this kind of in the background. So
That's good. All right, there's your bonus couple minutes.
yeah.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Eric.